All right, everyone, welcome. So today, we're really going to dive into what I think is one of the most rewarding, but also one of the most challenging parts of Merleau-Ponty's work. We're going to explore his really unique take on perception, what you might call his science of seeing. And as you'll see, it pretty much flips our standard ideas about both science and the world right on their heads.
So let's start with the central mystery. Just think about it for a second. Right now, your senses are being flooded with information. Light, sound, the pressure of your seat. It's a constant storm of raw data. So why don't you just experience a meaningless chaos? Instead, you see a room, you see objects, you hear a voice. The big question, the one Merleau-Ponty spent his entire life trying to answer, is this: how does all that sensory static transform into a stable, meaningful reality?
Now, as you'll know from the reading, philosophy has traditionally had two main suspects in this case. You've got empiricism on one side, and on the other, a viewpoint Merleau-Ponty kind of groups together and calls intellectualism. He argued that for centuries, philosophers were just stuck, bouncing back and forth between these two ideas, and neither one of them ever really got close to describing the world as we actually live it.
Okay, so let's just quickly review these two traditional answers. To really get what Merleau-Ponty is doing, we have to understand what he was pushing back against.
Think about it like this. For empiricism, the mind is basically a builder. It gets all these raw materials, meaningless bits of sense data, like individual bricks of color or shape, and it has to assemble them into something meaningful, like a house. Intellectualism kind of flips that on its head. It says the mind is more like an architect who comes to the job site with a blueprint already in hand, a concept like house, and it imposes that design onto the chaotic pile of bricks. Merleau-Ponty's critique here is so powerful because he says they're both wrong. One gives us a world with no inherent meaning, and the other gives us a mind that's basically just making it all up.
So Merleau-Ponty suggested a pretty radical third option. He said we have to learn to see perception as a totality, a whole picture where meaning isn't just slapped on at the end. Instead, it's already there, woven into the fabric of the thing itself. His goal was to show us how meaning is found in the world, not made up by the mind. It's a subtle shift, I know, but it is absolutely profound.
And to build this new way of thinking, Merleau-Ponty looked to a pretty revolutionary movement in the psychology of his day. He found a crucial clue in the work of the Gestalt psychologists. And this is where his analysis gets really original and powerful.
So the word Gestalt, it just means form or shape in German, but the idea behind it is a game changer. We don't perceive the world in little tiny pieces that we then have to put together. We perceive organized, meaningful wholes, gestalts, and we get them immediately. It's not a conscious calculation. You just see the form, the pattern.
And that brings us to their most famous saying. This simple phrase was a direct assault on that old atomistic idea that perception is just built up from tiny separate sensations. And it makes perfect sense, right? A song isn't just a random series of notes. A face isn't just a collection of eyes, a nose, and a mouth. Something new emerges, the whole, and it has its own character.
So the Gestaltists gave Merleau-Ponty this whole new vocabulary. They showed that our perception has a built-in structure. We don't have to decide which part is the figure and which is the background. We just see it that way instantly. But for our purposes, that last point is the most important one. This idea that our perception is organized around a normative sense of rightness, an intuitive, almost pre-verbal feeling that things are as they should be, or that something is just off. That's the key.
Okay, so let's dig into how Merleau-Ponty takes these ideas from Gestalt psychology and uses them to build his own theory of perception, one where meaning is actually found in the world.
He gives this absolutely brilliant, everyday example that I'm sure we can all relate to. You walk into a room and you just feel that something isn't right. You can't name it yet. It's just a vague, poorly localized disorder. That feeling of wrongness is immediate and undeniable, long before you know what's causing it.
This simple experience actually shows us the true order of perception. First, you get this holistic feeling of disorder, that Gestalt sense of imbalance. It's only after that feeling that you start an active, conscious search. And then, finally, you have the specific discovery. Aha, the picture frame is crooked. The most important thing to grasp here is that the meaning, the sense that something was wrong, came first, before any intellectual analysis.
And this is the punchline. For Merleau-Ponty, meaning is immanent. It's already there, inside the very fabric, the sensory text of the world itself. It's not something our intellect adds later. Our body, as this perceiving living subject, has an intelligent grip on the world.
It can receive and experience this meaning directly. The body doesn't just sense things, it understands them.
And Merleau-Ponty wasn't the only one thinking this way. This quote from his contemporary Heidegger really captures the same idea perfectly. We don't experience brown patches and squareness and then conclude, oh, that must be a table. No, we experience the table. We perceive a world that's already filled with meaningful things, not some cloud of data that's just waiting for us to interpret it.
Okay, so this brings us to our final section. And I know from our discussions that this is often the idea that feels the most, unconventional. If perception isn't a mental calculation, if it's a direct experience of meaning, then how on earth can we call the study of it, phenomenology, a science?
Merleau-Ponty really takes aim at what he calls objective thought. This is that classic ideal of science that imagines a scientist can somehow achieve a view from nowhere, a completely detached, godlike perspective on reality that isn't tied to any particular point of view. Phenomenology says, maybe that's not possible or even desirable.
This quote really nails the role of phenomenology. It's not trying to replace physics or biology. It recognizes that our basic lived perception is the fundamental background that makes all science possible in the first place. Every scientific act, whether it's looking through a microscope or writing an equation on a board, grows out of our direct perceptual engagement with the world.
So, the scientific task of phenomenology is rigorous description. Its goal is to return to this pre-objective world, the world as we actually live it through our bodies, and describe it carefully. It wants to reveal the very structures of meaning that we all live in, the structures that make the objective world of classical science even thinkable. You could almost call it a foundational science.
And so we'll end with this question, which is really the reorientation Merleau-Ponty asks of us. If the world already comes to us structured and full of meaning, then maybe the role of the scientist isn't to impose order on chaos. Maybe the real job is to become better at listening to and articulating the complex, immanent order that's already there. It doesn't change what science sees, but it completely changes how we understand the act of seeing itself.